Hi, this is E.R. Brooks, and welcome to Storytime with Brooks, wherein I read you a chapter of my book, Kidnapping Grimm. Today we find ourselves at chapter 3, wherein the Grimm family has to figure out what they're going to do now that Faye's been taken. So, sit down with a nice cup of cocoa and popcorn or something fun like that, and buckle in for the ride. So, without further ado, here's Storytime with Brooks. War doesn't determine who's right. It determines who remains. R.F. Kuang. Oma showed up on what remained of our doorstep the next day, eyes red from crying, and I couldn't stop myself from sobbing as I threw myself into her arms. There, Liebste, she whispered softly as she held me tightly. It's going to be okay, she soothed. She's gone, I sobbed. The dam of grief and fear was breaking anew within my heart, and I felt the loss all over again. Oma! Evadne yelled, launching herself at us. Maman, Dad whispered hoarsely as he navigated around the piles of debris that he, Evadne, and I had been consolidating. What happened, Ruslan? Oma asked quietly as she surveyed the shattered remains of our house. Cold December sunlight streamed through the thick plastic that we had stapled over the gaping windows, refracting eerily through the piles of broken glass in the dimly lit room. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Dad replied as he gave her a hug over the top of us. I could hardly believe it myself. You know I would, Oma replied smoothly, her breath fogging in the air around us. You have seen for yourself what I tried to tell you all those years ago. Dad nodded mutely, his face still a shell of disbelief and grief. Come, Oma said resolutely. Tea is in order for the story you must relive. Girls, go... Go where? Oma cut in. We would be fools to let them out of our sight until we knew for certain why Faye was taken. Nothing is safe anymore. Dad nodded. Amaris will be in the hospital for a week, assuming she recovers fully. Faye. His voice broke off in a ragged sob that he quickly reined in. Tea, Oma said firmly. Then we will exchange our stories and sort through the clues that have been left behind. Her heavily wrinkled face was lined with worry as she slowly led the way toward the kitchen. Oma often reminded me of Sophie from the animated version of Howl's Moving Castle, all wrinkles and wit, with a spryness that put people to shame when they doubted her. Her thick white hair was pulled back into a long braid, interwoven with innumerable plants and stones, dried flowers and bits of twigs. She smelled like fresh earth and oatmeal, with a hint of dried herbs and lavender, a strange mix that only made sense when it applied to her. She was wearing a thick gray sweater and a long plaid skirt, and over that was a heavy brown cloak with pockets that bulged with herbs and packages wrapped in cloth. Oma stopped in the kitchen doorway, sucking a breath in sharply as she stared at the large blood stain on the wood. It doesn't belong to her, Dad muttered. Oma nodded curtly, blinking back tears that had gathered in her eyes. Right then, she choked out. Tea. She made herself busy, pulling out the teapot and teacups that miraculously hadn't been broken in the assault. She set the kettle on to boil. Evadne and I huddled by the lone space heater, shivering through our multiple layers from the cold that had claimed our house. The furnace had been damaged, and a repairman couldn't come until the end of the week. The draft that seeped in through the plastic-covered windows did nothing to ward off the chill. Oma pulled out a bulky, sloppily wrapped package out of her cloak pockets, and I pounced, sure it was cookies. Dad began to tell her what had happened, and Evadne abandoned the warmth of the heater in favor of helping me consume the cookies. Goodness, Ruslan, have you fed the girls at all this morning? Oma asked, skeptically, interrupting his narrative as she eyed how quickly we devoured the bundle of cookies in front of us. Dad paused to consider. We had returned from the town's hotel first thing and spent all morning covering up the windows with plastic. Lunch had been forgotten in our haste to protect the interior of the house. He mumbled. I forgot. Oma snorted. You are truly helpless with Aunt Amaris, aren't you? He nodded sheepishly, and she shook her head. Thank goodness I've come, then, she tisked. We cannot expect children to skip meals in the way we do when we become absorbed in our work. They're growing, for heaven's sake. Their bodies cannot take that kind of strain. Dad nodded, shooting us an apologetic glance as he scooted both his cookies our way. We took them and nodded seriously, indicating that the score was even. He gave us a small smile and took a deep breath, bracing himself to resume his retelling. The story came out in bits and pieces, broken up numerous times toward the end as he dashed away tears and blew his nose. I couldn't protect her, he said at last, guilt hanging on every word. I was right there, and I couldn't make my body move. I failed her, just like I failed Jacques. The magic has found you, Oma said solemnly. She was lost deep in thought, her voice lowering to a murmuring whisper. Oh, Ruslan, I was a fool not to connect the memories. I knew such a place and such monsters existed, but I thought if I kept us far away, it could never touch our lives. I was so naive to believe that we could ever be safe from those creatures after all this time. Jack's disappearance, it was no coincidence. I should have known. What is she talking about? I can't wake up, Dad muttered. Every moment I keep hoping that I'll feel enough pain that it'll all come crashing down and I'll wake up, having simply created this nightmare in my mind. No, love, it's not a dream, Oma said gently. I wish I could tell you it was, but it's not. The best thing we can do now is figure out how to move forward. Dad ran a hand through his hair, making it stand on end. How can you possibly think of moving forward when something like this has happened? You cannot stay trapped in the past. You need to be strong for the ones who remain. You should leave this place. I won't, Dad snapped. I won't leave Faye. He gulped, his voice lowering to a whisper. Besides, that man, that monster said if we take the twins and run, he'll kill Faye and take the girls anyways. We do not negotiate with terrorists, Oma muttered as she scooped tea leaves into the teapot. I need you to stay with the girls, Dad said at last, as Oma reached for one of the few cookies left. Take them into town, Dad continued. Stay at the hotel and protect them. Check on Amaris. I have to go after Faye. You cannot find her, Oma replied, eyeing him coldly over her cookie. I will not sit idly by and do nothing to save her, Dad snapped. You will get yourself killed. Take the other two and go. I will not risk their lives. All men die, Oma replied quietly, her eyes miles away. They too, precious as they are, will face death. But if you wish to have a fighting chance to save them, you should flee. Evadne pressed closer to me. Her trembling fingers encircled mine, sticky with crumbs and melted chocolate. Shouldn't the girls go upstairs? Dad whispered harshly. You speak in riddles filled with ill omens and death. It will only frighten them. Don't you think they've been through enough in the last 24 hours? No, Oma said sharply. It is no use trying to hide from them what is going on. If you will not run with them, then at least give them the truth. Fate will come for them soon enough. If we do not tell them, then they will only jump to worse conclusions and fear will control them. They must be aware of the peril that now surrounds them. You all must. She pulled another bundle of cookies out of her cloak pocket and handed us each a cookie. Eat, Lieblings, for the story I hold is one of darkness. Her eyes were far away and full of sadness. Yet, it is one I must tell you regardless, she murmured. Oh, how I wish I could spare you of the horrors I have carried. Everything seemed so disconnected and confusing. I could barely comprehend what was going on through the lens of what had happened. Faye was gone, and here I was eating cookies that now tasted of pumpkin spice and thick herbs instead of chocolate and oatmeal. Why weren't we looking for her? Why weren't we doing more? Can you stay with them? Dad asked urgently. I need to get going. I need to track them down and get Faye back. You need this information more than they do, my son. Maman, Ruslan, Oma cut in quietly. You cannot bring her back. Please, Dad rasped, his voice ragged. I have to try. With every moment that passes, she gets farther and farther away. You could not stop them the first time. I was unprepared. And you think you will be more prepared now? Your bullet was useless. What do you plan to do? Throw the gun itself at him? Run him through with a butter knife? Attempt a crucifix or perhaps a garland of garlic? None of those things will keep the Fae at bay. You are a grave waiting to be filled. Do not leave your children without their father. Dad opened and closed his mouth, stubborn determination entering his gaze. The twins have already lost their brother. They watched the Fae rip their sister away from this house and harm their mother. Do not take away their father by going on a suicide mission. Maris and the girls need you." He shook his head, desperation and fear clouding his eyes. "Hear me out," Oma said gently. "And if you still insist on going, then I shall not stand in your way." The kettle began to scream, a growing cry that filled the hollow kitchen. Dad nodded, barely settling onto the edge of his chair before Oma shoved a cookie into his hand. "Eat," she said firmly. "You look like death warmed over." He made a face that clearly showed he disagreed, but he didn't bother to argue as he bit into the cookie. Oma poured the boiling water into the teapot, closing her eyes as she inhaled the steam that rose. "Long ago," she began, her voice a low murmur above the cold winter wind that beat against the plastic, "mankind and Fae lived within the same layer of the world. They dwelt in our woods, tricked our men and stole our maidens, placing horrible curses or overwhelming blessings on whomever they pleased. They brought upon us their petty forms of so-called justice, testing the goodness of mankind and punishing the ones they deemed selfish." I was holding my breath, picking at the scab on my wrist where a piece of glass had sliced it open. "Faye is missing. She's talking about fairy tales? Faye is missing and she's telling us stories? We should be out looking for her. We should be looking for her. Where is she? 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 We have to help her." The world began to change, and as it changed, the power grew. The Fae became more dangerous, and darkness began to creep over the world. But a sacrifice was made, and the world was recreated, divided into realms bound by magic and blood. Their darkest magic was contained within unbreakable borders, bound by a gate and tied to the runes. Such darkness was guarded by the ones who, with their lives, contained the evil. Oma poured each of us a steaming cup of tea, stirring a generous amount of honey into each mug. She then added milk into all but mine. I was dreadfully allergic to milk. We all sipped our tea in silence, lost in thought at the strange information she had given us. The hot tea tasted of sweet herbs and flowers against my tongue, giving me a false sense of calm and security. Time moved on, Oma continued. The world of men advanced, growing and changing, and for a season the world was safe. Mankind slowly forgot the world that lingered on the edges of reality, and it became nothing more than a fairy tale told to scare children. It was forgotten by all except those whose lives were directly tarnished, as yours have now been, by the Fae. "So you're saying that man, that impossibly magical monster, was Fae?" Dad asked in disbelief. "You're saying there's such things as fairies?" "Would you call me a liar after what you've just endured?" Oma asked quietly. "After watching helplessly as they wrenched Faye from you and hurt your family? That monster held you in place with nothing but shadows and let a bullet pass through him as if it were nothing. You know what you saw, which is why you did not call the police." Dad shook his head, pushed into unwilling agreement. "Ember, stop picking at your cut," Oma said firmly, pulling my bloody fingers away from the scab I had torn open. She placed another cookie in my hand. "It won't bring her back, Liebste," she said gently. "It won't make the pain inside of you stop." "Oma?" Ivani asked quietly, her pale face screwed up in fierce concentration. "Yes, Liebes Herz, loving heart." It was my favorite aspect of Oma, her German heritage and the pet names she assigned to each of us. Faye's was Zaubermaus, which meant magic mouse. How she had gotten that nickname was a closely guarded secret between the two of them, and I was certain they only kept it from me for the sole purpose of driving me crazy. They knew I hated being kept out of a secret. "Why did they take Faye?" Ivani asked quietly. "And why did that man say that he would come for me and Em?" "You know that your father was adopted by me, correct?" Alma asked gently as she smoothed a stray strand of hair behind Ivani's ear. "The last name his birth mother put on the adoption papers was Grimm. It was the only inheritance a dying woman could give him, the only clue she could leave as to who he really was. There are those in the realm known as Grimm, and they are the defenders. Defenders of what? I asked excitedly. If Faye was defending something, that meant she was valuable, and if she was valuable, then she would be protected. Alma's eyes were distant, searching for something just out of reach. I cannot remember, she sighed at last. Dad's face screwed up in confusion. You never forget anything, Maman. She smiled sadly and sighed. I was hoping you wouldn't have to tell you before death claimed me. I didn't want you to see me fade in such a way. Her voice trailed off and a lone tear streaked down her cheek. The doctors tell me it's Alzheimer's, she said at last in defeat. Dad reached out a hand to hers and she squeezed it, her eyes distant. I refuse to accept their assessment, though, she said airily, wiping away her tear as she forced back her fear. A shadow passed over Dad's face, but he said nothing as he poured another cup of tea. How do you know any of this? He asked at last. I was taken when I was a mere girl, Omar replied quietly. There was a boy with the strangest silver eyes, who lured me into the woods. The man who came in the back door last night had silver eyes. He was crying that he had been injured and needed help because his father was unconscious. He said there had been some sort of an accident, that there was no time. Oma shuddered, her voice a hollow whisper. I lived in the days before stranger danger became a warning, and it didn't occur to me that there were holes in his story, or that following him would put me in danger. The village I lived in was a kind, close-knit community. We were family to one another, determined to dwell together in peace and love. I had no knowledge of the evil that lurked within mankind's heart. She fell still beside us, lost in thought and struggling to find the words. When I was returned, I made myself forget, she said at last. I thought if I forgot, then it would all disappear. The doctors told me I was crazy, that I had imagined it, and after hearing it for so long, I almost began to believe it. Tears spilled out of her eyes in earnest, gathering in the wrinkles and sliding down the laughter lines. If I hadn't, then I would have told you when you were young. I could have raised you better, and you might have been aware of the dangers that lurk at the edges of our world, instead of thinking I was simply eccentric. It might have saved them from this. My poor labelings. Oh, Ruslan, I bear a share of the blame. Dad placed his other hand in hers, gently squeezing it between both of his palms. You know I wouldn't have believed it until I saw it with my own eyes, he said gently. None of this is your fault. She nodded, wiping her tears with a flowered handkerchief. What happened next? I asked, desperate for the rest of the story. I followed him through those woods until the sun began to set. Only then did I begin to question the ignorance of my choice, but by then it was too late. He stopped in a clearing, and there were creatures, humanoid monsters all around us. He began to whisper strange words, laced with power and magic. Our blood danced, and they watched in silent outrage. He called it substitution, and in that act I was forced to take his place. It was an insult to the realm that he, a guardian Grimm, left. They hated me. I don't know how long I was trapped there. I lost track of the seasons as the solstices came and passed. I lost myself, slowly burying my mind to endure the horrors that they thrust upon me in their rage. She fell silent again, wading through the tangled memories. I knew naught but fear, she murmured. Then one day, a man named F appeared, a man with silver eyes. It was the boy. He had grown up, and now the guilt of what he had done haunted him. He revoked his right of substitution, and before I could process what was going on, I found myself back in the mortal realm. After wandering through the woods for days, at last I found my village. Everyone I had known was dead. 100 years had passed without me, and when my shattered mind could not bear the shock, they put me in an asylum. Those monsters masquerading as doctors tortured me until I no longer talked of fairies and realms and a darkness that clung to me. I was kept in that place until I too believed that I was crazy and none of it was real. Evany sniffed. She was crying quietly, so deeply moved by Oma's horrific ordeal. It is okay, liebes Herz, Oma said gently. I am still here today. I rose from the ashes they made of me, and I am stronger because of it. The blond man with the silver eyes, Dad began, trying to put the pieces together. He called me son. When your mother died, she left you the only clue she had about who you truly were and to whom your heritage belonged. The only solution we can draw is that you are F's son, a child he unknowingly sired before the guilt of what he'd done drove him from his human wife and back to the realm. He tried to warn us, Dad whispered. He came here and I didn't listen. He told us we were in danger and I wouldn't listen. Oma nodded. It is an impossible thing to wrap your mind around. Do not dwell on it for too long. He gave you an impossible ultimatum. It is not your fault, but the guilt will still try to eat you alive. Dad buried his head in his hands. What do we do? He muttered. The world as you know it is gone, then, son. The best thing you can do is try to protect yourselves and prepare for what's coming. How? Dad asked, exasperation and frustration overwhelming him. How can we possibly do anything? I feel like my brain is exploding while everything falls to pieces around me. Oma laid a hand on his shoulder. We set up wards, and then you must let me teach the girls the broken bits I can still remember. If F returns, we must find a way to make him help us. She paused. I am certain he is already willing. Why else would he have come to you, especially when it put him in such danger? How can that help the girls if we cannot stop this? How can you help them if your mind is failing? You said so yourself. Those things are useless against them. Leave my mind to me. Until it fails completely, I will do my best to prepare them so that they stand a chance. Oma surveyed the mess around us. But first you must make your home safe again. A man without walls is defenseless and vulnerable. What about Faye? Dad asked at last. You cannot get her back. There could be a chance. Ruslan. No Grimm escapes. F got out, Dad snapped stubbornly, and you said there was a way of substitution. F is not back. He comes at a great risk, but he always returns to the realm. Substitution can only be invoked by a Grimm of the Gate. Do you really think that Faye would choose that? Oma cut in. Do you really think your daughter, who loves and loves deeply, your child who bears the pain of others, will allow another to drink the poison of that place in her stead? No, and I would not wish her the guilt of living with that should she choose such a path. She is strong. I know she will make it. The only thing you can do now is delay their abduction of the twins and try to give the girls a fighting chance. Why? Why? Dad cried desperately, burying his head in his hands. What have we done to deserve this? We often do not get what we deserve, Oma replied quietly, but we must all choose how we play the cards we have been dealt. The world through my eyes had changed overnight, and now, with this new onslaught of information, it had grown darker still. Just worse, not knowing exactly what the world has become, or facing the truth of what awaits us and the dread that comes with the knowledge. Go back to normal. Please, let it go back to normal. Wake up, wake up, wake up. But there was no waking up. This nightmare had become our reality. Thanks for tuning in this week, and tune in next week for the next chapter of Kidnapping Grimm. Have a wonderful week and take care.